Mr. Lamassoure, what are your expectations from a big debate, Hollande-Merkel tomorrow? And what is your personal take on immigration crisis in Europe?
Well, from this debate, I expect more than a commemoration, because this debate was proposed by President Schulz initially not to prepare the future, but to commemorate the event which happened 25 years ago, when immediately after the fall of the Berlin Wall, President Mitterrand and Chancellor Kohl appeared before the European Parliament to comment the event and to make first proposals for the future. And I hope, but unfortunately I doubt it, that, well, with the same spirit, President Hollande and Mrs. Angela Merkel will be willing and able to make concrete proposals, not to manage the current crisis situation on migration, Syria, terrorism or Ukraine, but to propose a big step forward for the European project.
Mr. Lamassoure, what is a big step now? Because our citizens are very disappointed in the way the migration crisis was handled. Our Schengen was abandoned, then it was reestablished, then we saw that the division between migrants and refugees became very, very blurred. So how within this situation, when Europe lost face, there can be a big step forward taken now?
Precisely. This is the best example to demonstrate that we need Europe, we need one common European migration and, by the way, foreign policy to tackle this issue. What has been abundantly demonstrated by the events for the last 6 months, is that if left alone, member states are unable to address the migration problem. Even the biggest member state, Germany, even a member state like Britain or Denmark, outside the so-called Schengen area, are unable to cope with this challenge. We need a common asylum and migration policy, not only to address the current crisis linked to war in the Middle East, but also to take into account both the economic migrations we are highly likely to come from the rest of the world towards Europe in the next 20 or 30 years, and the needs of not all member states, but many member states for their workforce, particularly in those countries where the birth rate is particularly low. We know that from the 1st January of '93, when the Schengen Treaty came into force and when we abolished the controls inside the European Union. But, and it was the same with the euro, well, we waited for a huge crisis to start tackling this issue. If Angela Merkel and François Hollande were able to propose to launch a common asylum and migration policy right now, it would be the huge step forward we need.
Mr. Lamassoure, there are 51 million displaced refugees along the borders of Europe. So how many refugees in perspective Europe can take? Even if Europe takes 1 million per year, it would need 50 years to satisfy the demand.
No. We must, part of this policy must consist in addressing the problem at the origin. For instance, the Syrian war started 4.5 years ago, but it's only now, after 4 years, then this exodus of migrants come to Europe, reach Europe. Why? Because we haven't made sufficient efforts on the spot in Syria and in favor of the refugees camps in the neighboring countries to ensure that, well, the war is over as soon as possible, and that in the meantime the refugees are well fed and treated, can access to work, etc. So it's a comprehensive policy we must engage in and not take action as if whenever a tragedy, whatever the origin, came out whenever and wherever in the world, Europe is the solution. No, Europe can take part to settle the problem not in Europe, but when the problem